Texas Hill Country, 1875. The drought had turned the landscape into a canvas of browns and yellows, punctuated only by the occasional green of hardy mesquite. The town of Prosperity wasn't living up to its name these days. Most folks were just trying to survive the unforgiving summer as the land cracked open like parched lips begging for water. Jackson Baxter hadn't expected much from life since returning from the war. At 25, he'd seen enough violence to last several lifetimes. The frontier demanded toughness, and he'd obliged by building walls around his heart as solid as the limestone ridges that dotted the countryside. A cowboy couldn't afford attachments in this unforgiving territory. Love was a luxury for city folk with comfortable homes and stable futures, not for men who rode the lonely trails where danger lurked behind every mesquite bush. No sense in planting roots in shifting sands, he often told himself, pulling his hat lower as he rode past young couples building their futures in town. His weathered hands belonged to the saddle and the lariat, not to holding another's heart. The war had taught him that loss was the only certainty in life, and the frontier reinforced that lesson daily. Jackson had been riding with the double-cross outfit for 3 years, moving cattle and keeping to himself. He was respected for his skills and reliability, but few knew the man beneath the broad-brimmed hat. His handsome face, with its strong jawline and penetrating blue eyes, rarely revealed what stirred within. A light stubble typically covered his sun-bronzed skin, and his lean, muscular frame spoke of countless hours in the saddle. When the foreman assigned him to escort the rancher's niece from the stagecoach station in San Antonio back to the ranch, Jackson had nodded without complaint, though inwardly he'd groaned. Babysitting some Eastern girl didn't appeal to him, but work was work, and the double-cross paid fair wages. "She's coming to teach at the new school," the foreman had explained. "Mr. Cross says to treat her like family." Jackson had simply nodded, mounting his dun gelding and heading south toward San Antonio, unaware that his carefully constructed beliefs about survival and solitude were about to be challenged. The stagecoach station bustled with activity when Jackson arrived. Dust swirled in the late afternoon sun as passengers disembarked, stretching road-weary limbs. He scanned the crowd, looking for a woman who might match the description he'd been given. Blonde hair, blue traveling dress, 22 years old. When he spotted her standing alone beside her trunk, something unexpected happened. She wasn't merely pretty, she was striking. Her golden blonde hair was swept up beneath a modest blue hat that matched her traveling dress. Though clearly fatigued from her journey, she stood with a quiet dignity that caught his attention. Her face, heart-shaped and delicate, bore an expression of determined optimism that seemed out of place in the harsh frontier setting. Jackson approached, removing his hat. "Miss O'Hara, I'm Jackson Baxter from the Double Cross. Your uncle sent me to escort you to the ranch." Josephine O'Hara turned, her sapphire eyes meeting his with unexpected directness. "Mr. Baxter, I'm pleased to make your acquaintance. Thank you for coming all this way." Her voice carried the refined tones of an education back east, but lacked the condescension he'd expected. As they made arrangements for her trunk and secured a modest room for the night before the long ride to the ranch, Jackson maintained his professional distance. This was just another job: escort the lady safely, then return to the isolation he preferred. What he couldn't have anticipated was the conversation over supper that evening. "Have you worked for my uncle long, Mr. Baxter?" she asked, cutting delicately into her beefsteak. 3 years come autumn," he replied, his responses intentionally brief. "And before that." Jackson paused, fork midair. Most people knew better than to ask men about their pasts out here. The West was full of people running from something. "I fought for the Confederacy, came west after." His tone suggested the topic was closed. Instead of retreating, she nodded thoughtfully. "Many did, my brother among them, he never came home." The simple statement, delivered without self-pity, caught him off guard. Her eyes held a sadness that echoed his own, and for a brief moment the walls he'd built wavered. "I'm sorry for your loss, Miss O'Hara." "As am I for whatever losses brought that shadow to your eyes, Mr. Baxter." Her perception unsettled him. "The war took much from all of us, didn't it? But I believe we honor those we've lost by living fully." Jackson changed the subject quickly, uncomfortable with her insight. "We'll leave at first light. It's a 2-day ride to your uncle's ranch." She accepted his redirection gracefully, but something had shifted. In recognizing his pain without demanding its details, Josephine had introduced an unfamiliar feeling, the possibility of being understood. The journey began at dawn, Josephine astride a gentle mare the livery had provided. Jackson had expected complaints about the long hours in the saddle, the heat, the dust. Instead, she rode capably, maintaining a steady pace beside him. When he remarked on her skill, her smile revealed a glimpse of mischief. My father believed a lady should ride as well as she dances, perhaps better, as horses are more reliable companions than most gentlemen. The unexpected humor drew a reluctant chuckle from Jackson. By midday, they'd fallen into a comfortable rhythm, with Josephine asking thoughtful questions about the land they traversed. The wildflowers here, they survive such harsh conditions, she observed as they rode past a patch of defiant bluebonnets clinging to life despite the drought. There's something admirable in that persistence, don't you think? Jackson followed her gaze. He'd ridden past such sights 100 times without notice. Suppose there is, though they'll be gone once August hits full force. But they'll have lived their purpose, she replied, and they'll return next spring. There's hope in that cycle. Hope was a word that had long ago vanished from Jackson's vocabulary, along with dreams, trust, and love. Yet something in her earnest expression made him wonder if he'd been wrong to discard such notions entirely. They made camp that evening near a small creek, one of the few still flowing despite the drought. After tending the horses, Jackson built a fire while Josephine unpacked the provisions. The domesticity of the scene, a man and woman sharing simple tasks in the fading light, stirred uncomfortable feelings he'd thought long buried. I imagine teaching out here will be different from back east, he said, surprising himself by initiating conversation. Josephine looked up from the bread and preserves she was laying out. Different, yes, but no less important. Children need education wherever they are, perhaps more so on the frontier where life demands such resourcefulness. Most ranch hands I know never saw the inside of a schoolhouse. And did that serve them well? She asked, passing him a plate. The question lingered between them as twilight deepened into night. Jackson found himself speaking more than he had in months, sharing observations about the land, the ranching operation, the drought that was testing everyone's endurance. Josephine listened with genuine interest, asking questions that revealed her intelligence and adaptability. As they prepared to retire, she to her bedroll, he to keep watch, Josephine paused. Thank you, Mr. Baxter. For what, miss? For seeing me as more than just a burden to be delivered. Most men would. Her words stayed with him as he sat beneath the star-filled sky, rifle across his lap. For years, he'd convinced himself that the frontier was no place for tenderness or connection. Survival demanded isolation, yet here was this woman, facing the same harsh reality with openness rather than walls. The second day of their journey brought trouble. Jackson spotted dust on the horizon, riders approaching fast. His hand moved instinctively to his revolver. Miss O'Hara, he said quietly, we need to find cover. Now. To her credit, she asked no questions, immediately following as he led them toward a stand of trees and rocks. Once there, he helped her dismount quickly. Stay here with the horses. Keep low, he pressed his spare revolver into her hand, surprised when she took it with competent familiarity. Be careful, was all she said, her eyes steady on his. Jackson moved to higher ground, studying the approaching riders. 4 men, hard-looking, riding with purpose. When they slowed, examining the trail, his suspicions were confirmed. These weren't friendly travelers. The sound of a twig breaking behind him had Jackson spinning around, only to find Josephine crouched nearby. I told you to stay hidden, he hissed, and leave you to face 4 men alone. That seemed imprudent, she whispered back. I grew up with 3 brothers, Mr. Baxter. I'm not entirely helpless. Before he could respond, one of the riders called out. We know you're there, come out and maybe we'll let the lady live. Jackson met Josephine's eyes. Road agents, he explained quietly. They've been hitting travelers between here and San Antonio. Stay down. He stood slowly, revolver held loosely at his side but ready. Just passing through, gentlemen. No need for trouble. The leader, a bearded man with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, laughed harshly. Trouble's already found you, cowboy. Throw down your gun and tell your woman to come out, maybe we'll be generous. I'm afraid I can't oblige you, Jackson replied, his voice deceptively calm while his mind calculated angles, distances, odds. What happened next occurred with startling swiftness. The leader reached for his weapon. Jackson drew and fired in one fluid motion, hitting the man in the shoulder. As the others went for their guns, a shot rang out from beside Jackson. Josephine had taken aim at one of the bandits, grazing his arm enough to spoil his shot. The brief firefight ended with two of the road agents wounded, the others fleeing. Jackson stood momentarily stunned, looking at the woman beside him who had just saved his life. My brothers insisted, she said, answering his unspoken question. After the war, they said a woman alone should know how to defend herself. Something shifted in Jackson's chest, a crack in the foundation of his belief that love and connection were luxuries the frontier didn't allow. This woman, with her education and refinement, possessed a core of steel that matched the land itself. They resumed their journey, the shared danger creating a different kind of companionship between them. Jackson found himself watching Josephine with new eyes, noting how the sunlight caught her hair, how her posture remained elegant despite the rigors of the trail. Why teaching? He asked as they rode side by side across a stretch of open grassland. A woman with your advantages could have stayed east, found a comfortable life. Josephine considered before answering. After losing my brother and then my father soon after, I needed purpose. Teaching provides that. Every child educated is a building block for a better future, she glanced at him, and you, Mr. Baxter, is ranching your purpose. The question pierced deeper than she could know. It's steady work, he evaded. The land doesn't ask questions or make demands beyond what a man can do with his hands. Unlike people, her perception was uncomfortably accurate. People leave or die, Miss O'Hara, the land endures. So does love, she said softly, even when those we love are gone. Her words stayed with him as they approached the Double Cross Ranch the following afternoon. The sprawling operation came into view, the main house, bunkhouse, barns and corrals spread across the valley floor. Cattle dotted the distant pastures, though fewer than in better years. The drought had taken its toll here too. Workers paused in their tasks as Jackson rode in with Josephine. Her uncle, Gregory Cross, emerged from the main house, his weathered face breaking into a smile at the sight of his niece. Josie. Thank the Lord you've arrived safely, he embraced her as she dismounted. Jackson, my thanks for bringing her without incident. Jackson nodded, not mentioning their encounter with the road agents. Miss O'Hara proved a capable traveler, sir. As Josephine was swept inside by her aunt and female cousins, Gregory Cross turned to Jackson. I'm sending a herd north to the railhead next week. Need my best men on it. You interested? Yes, sir. The cattle drive would mean weeks away, distance from the unsettling feelings Josephine O'Hara had stirred in him. Happy to go. Good man, rest up. We'll discuss details tomorrow. That evening, the ranch hosted a small gathering to welcome Josephine. Jackson, despite his preference for solitude, found himself drawn to the main house. He watched from the periphery as she charmed the local families, speaking passionately about her plans for the school. When she approached him, glass of lemonade in hand, he straightened from his position against the wall. You're leaving, she said, not a question. Cattle drive to Kansas, good opportunity. Josephine nodded, understanding what remained unsaid. The frontier demands movement, doesn't it? Always pushing forward, rarely still enough to put down roots. Some aren't meant for roots, Miss O'Hara. Perhaps they simply haven't found the right soil. Her eyes met his, challenging the barriers he'd erected. Thank you again, Mr. Baxter, for your protection on our journey. I won't forget it. As she turned to rejoin the gathering, Jackson felt a momentary urge to reach for her hand, to ask her to stay and talk longer. He resisted, retreating instead to the familiar solitude of the bunkhouse, where he began preparations for the long drive north. The cattle drive proved grueling. Weeks of dust, danger, and backbreaking work should have driven thoughts of Josephine O'Hara from Jackson's mind. Instead, he found himself wondering what she would make of the vast open plains, the star-filled nights, the camaraderie of the cowboys around the campfire. Worse, he found himself missing their conversations, the way her mind worked, how she saw beauty where he'd only noticed harshness. You're mighty quiet these evenings, observed Hank, one of the older hands, as they sat by the fire one night. More so than usual, even. Jackson shrugged, just focused on the job. Wouldn't have nothing to do with the schoolteacher, would it? The one all the boys back at the ranch can't stop talking about. Jackson's sharp look only made Hank chuckle. Thought so, she's something special from what I hear. Even got old man Jenkins to donate lumber for schoolhouse benches. The news shouldn't have pleased Jackson so much. Nor should he have cared that apparently half the unmarried men in the county were finding excuses to ride past the newly constructed schoolhouse where Josephine had begun teaching. When the cattle drive ended and they returned to the double cross, autumn was painting the hills with muted golds and reds. Jackson told himself he wasn't looking for Josephine as they rode in, that the leap in his chest when he spotted her crossing the yard was merely relief at returning safely. She saw him too, her face brightening momentarily before composing itself into a polite smile. "Welcome back, Mr. Baxter. I trust your journey was successful." "Successful enough," he replied, suddenly awkward despite the rehearsed indifference he'd practiced. "The school seems to be thriving." "It is 23 students now, ages 6 to 16. Her pride was evident. "Perhaps you'd like to visit sometime. The children would benefit from hearing about cattle drives firsthand." Before Jackson could respond, Gregory Cross approached. "Jackson, good timing, got a situation needs handling," he nodded to his niece. "Excuse us, Josie." The situation involved missing cattle and suspected rustlers operating in the county. Cross was forming a group to investigate and possibly confront the thieves, and he wanted Jackson's steady hand involved. "Could be dangerous," Cross warned. "These aren't amateurs. Already killed a rancher over in Kimball County." Jackson agreed to join the effort, driven partly by loyalty to the ranch and partly by the need to escape the confusing feelings Josephine evoked. Hunting rustlers was straightforward, uncomplicated by sapphire eyes and challenging questions. The night before he was to leave with the group, Jackson found himself walking toward the small cabin that had been prepared for Josephine near the main house. He told himself he was merely being polite, informing her of his absence in case she had planned that school visit. She answered his knock with surprise that quickly warmed to pleasure. "Mr. Baxter." "Please come in." The cabin was simply furnished but transformed by small touches. Books lining a shelf, wildflowers in a jar, student papers stacked neatly on a small desk. Jackson declined a seat, standing awkwardly just inside the door. "I'm riding out tomorrow. Your uncle's formed a group to track some rustlers." Concern immediately replaced her smile. "That sounds dangerous." "It's necessary. Rustling threatens the whole operation." Josephine stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the faint lavender scent that clung to her hair. "Please be careful, Jackson." His given name on her lips sent an unexpected warmth through him. "Always am." "Are you?" Her eyes searched his. "Sometimes I think you seek out danger because it's simpler than other things." The insight was too close to truth for comfort. "Not everyone's built for parlor conversations in schoolrooms, Miss O'Hara." "Josephine," she corrected softly, "and I wasn't suggesting they were, only that perhaps there's room in one life for both courage and tenderness." Jackson found himself without response, caught between the urge to flee and the stronger, more terrifying desire to close the distance between them. "I should go," he managed finally. "Early start tomorrow." She nodded, disappointment evident though she tried to mask it. "Good hunting, then, and safe return." He turned to leave, paused at the door. "That school visit. When I get back, if you still want me to come." Her smile returned, luminous in the lamp light. "I'll hold you to that, Mr. Baxter." The rustler hunt proved more dangerous than anticipated. The gang was well organized and familiar with the territory, leading Cross's men on a challenging pursuit through the hill country. After a week of tracking, they finally cornered 3 of the rustlers in an abandoned homestead. The ensuing firefight was brief but violent. Jackson took a bullet that grazed his side while helping one of the younger ranch hands who'd been pinned down. They captured 2 of the rustlers, the third died in the exchange. Among the stolen cattle, they discovered brands from 5 different ranches. When they returned to the double cross, Jackson dismissed his injury as minor despite the concerned looks from the other men. Cross insisted he see the doctor in town before resuming regular duties. No arguments, Baxter. Can't have you bleeding out on my watch. Besides, he added with a knowing glance, my niece would never forgive me if I didn't take proper care of her favorite cowboy. Jackson's surprise must have shown on his face, for Cross chuckled. You think I don't notice how she asks after you, or how you look for her every time you ride in? I may be getting old, but I'm not blind. The doctor confirmed the wound was superficial, but needed proper cleaning and rest to prevent infection. Jackson reluctantly agreed to light duties for a few days, his thoughts turning increasingly to Josephine and their interrupted conversation. Word of the returned posse and of Jackson's injury spread quickly. He was sitting on the porch of the bunkhouse, cleaning his revolver, when he saw her approaching purposefully from the direction of the main house. You're hurt, she said without preamble, her eyes taking in the bulge of bandages beneath his shirt. It's nothing, barely a scratch. He stood, uncomfortable with her concern. A bullet wound is hardly nothing, Mr. Baxter. There was an edge to her voice he hadn't heard before. Did it occur to you that people might worry when you ride into danger? It's part of the job. His defensiveness rose automatically. The frontier isn't safe, Miss O'Hara. Never has been. And that gives you leave to be reckless with your life. The fear beneath her anger was suddenly clear, startling in its intensity. Because you believe no one would care if you didn't return. Her words struck with devastating accuracy. The silence between them throbbed with unspoken emotions. I would care, she said finally, her voice softer but no less intense. I would care very much, Jackson. He couldn't recall moving, couldn't remember deciding to close the distance between them. Suddenly his hands were cradling her face, his lips finding hers in a kiss that demolished the last of his carefully constructed walls. When they broke apart, breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. I don't know how to do this, Josephine. I've spent years convincing myself that caring for someone out here was just asking for heartbreak. And I've spent years believing that love is the only thing that makes hardship bearable. Her hands rested against his chest, gentle but firm. I'll love you even in hard times, Jackson Baxter. That's the promise of love, not that difficulty won't come but that we face it together. The simple declaration shook him to his core. All his beliefs about survival and solitude seemed suddenly hollow in the face of her courage to love despite uncertainty. Their courtship progressed through the winter months, observed with knowing smiles by the ranch hands and Josephine's family. Jackson found himself helping with the school, first with repairs to the building, then occasionally sharing stories of his travels with the wide-eyed students. Josephine flourished as a teacher, respected by families who had initially been skeptical of the Eastern woman. But as spring approached, shadows from Jackson's past returned. A stranger rode into town asking questions about former Confederate soldiers. Rumors spread that he was a federal agent looking for men connected to a notorious prison camp where Union soldiers had been mistreated. Jackson grew distant, withdrawn, the old barriers threatening to rise again. Josephine found him one evening by the creek where they often walked. You're pulling away, she said quietly, sitting beside him on a fallen log. Because of the man asking questions. Jackson stared at the water. There are things you don't know about me, about what happened during the war. Then tell me, her hand covered his. Whatever it is, we'll face it together. The story spilled from him then, how he'd been assigned as a guard at a Confederate prison camp in Georgia during the last year of the war. How he'd witnessed atrocities, tried to help where he could without being detected, but ultimately failed to prevent the deaths of dozens of prisoners from starvation and disease. I didn't pull triggers, but I was part of it, he concluded hoarsely. After the war, I couldn't face going home, just kept moving west trying to outrun what I'd seen. What I'd been part of. Josephine listened without interruption, her hand steady in his. When he finished, expecting judgment or horror, she simply asked, and if this man finds you, what then? Some would call for my hanging. At minimum, I could face imprisonment. He finally met her eyes. I won't drag you into that, Josephine. You deserve better than a man with my past. Shouldn't I decide what I deserve? There was steel beneath her gentle tone. You were young, caught in a war you didn't start. You did what you could in impossible circumstances. It wasn't enough. The guilt that had driven him for years surfaced raw and bleeding. No, it wasn't. Nothing could have been, her voice remained steady. But punishing yourself forever won't bring back those who died. Living with purpose, with love, that honors them more truly. For the first time since the war, Jackson felt the possibility of forgiveness, not absolution for what had happened, but the chance to build something meaningful despite his past. The federal agent, for that's what he proved to be, eventually questioned Jackson directly. To his surprise, the questions focused not on punishment, but on verifying accounts from former prisoners who had named Jackson as one who had smuggled food and medicine into the camp when possible. "There's a former prisoner, a Colonel Matthews, who credits you with saving his life," the agent explained. "He's been trying to locate the guards who showed humanity to ensure they don't face blanket persecution." The revelation stunned Jackson. He had never expected gratitude or recognition, had carried only the weight of what he couldn't prevent rather than acknowledging what small good he had managed. When he told Josephine that evening, she took his hands in hers. "Don't you see, even in that darkness you chose compassion where you could. That's the man I love, one who finds light even in the darkest places." Spring brought renewal to the drought-stricken land. Rains returned, painting the hills with bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush. The cattle grew fat on fresh grass and the double-cross prospered. Jackson, promoted to foreman after the previous one retired, found himself putting down the roots he'd once avoided. On a perfect April evening, with sunset painting the sky in spectacular oranges and pinks, Jackson asked Josephine to ride with him to a hilltop overlooking the ranch. There, with the vista of their shared world spread before them, he knelt and offered her not just a simple gold ring but his transformed heart. "I once believed the frontier was no place for love," he told her, his voice steady despite the enormity of the moment. "That a man had to choose between connection and survival. You taught me that they're one and the same, that we survive because we love, not in spite of it." Tears shimmered in Josephine's eyes as she accepted both ring and declaration. "I told you I would love you even in hard times, Jackson Baxter. I meant it then and I mean it now." Their wedding in June brought together the entire community, ranchers and cowboys, Josephine's students and their families, even Colonel Matthews, who traveled from Tennessee to honor the man who had shown kindness in humanity's darkest hour. Under an arch of wildflowers, with the Texas sun blessing their union, Jackson and Josephine exchanged vows that acknowledged both the hardships they might face and the love that would sustain them through it all. "The frontier demands courage," Jackson said, holding Josephine's hands before the gathered witnesses. "I thought that meant facing life alone, trusting no one. You showed me that true courage is opening your heart despite knowing it can be broken. I promise to face whatever comes with that same courage, together." Josephine's response, delivered with the quiet strength that had first captured his heart, moved even the most weathered cowboys to discreetly wipe their eyes. "When I came west, people warned me about the dangers, the elements, the isolation, the hardship. No one mentioned the danger of meeting a man whose wounded soul would call to mine. I choose that danger gladly, Jackson. I choose you in abundance and in scarcity, in joy and in struggle." As they sealed their vows with a kiss, Jackson Baxter's heart, once closed against the possibility of love, swelled with a certainty he had never thought to find on the harsh frontier. This woman, with her strength and tenderness, had transformed his understanding of survival itself. 5 years later, the Baxter Ranch flourished alongside the school that Josephine continued to teach in, now with their young son sometimes accompanying her. The drought years had given way to prosperity, though frontier challenges remained. Together, they weathered each storm, their love deepening with every shared difficulty and triumph. On their 5th anniversary, Jackson found Josephine on the same hilltop where he had proposed. She stood watching the sunset, her golden hair now worn in a simple braid down her back, her figure still as graceful as when he'd first seen her at the stagecoach station. "Any regrets?" he asked, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. She turned in his embrace, her sapphire eyes as clear and direct as ever. "Only that it took us so long to find each other." As the Texas twilight wrapped around them, Jackson Baxter silently thanked the frontier that had shaped him, not for its harshness, but for preparing him to recognize true strength when he found it in Josephine's love. The cowboy who once believed he was destined to ride alone had found his home not in a place, but in a heart as vast and enduring as the western sky.